Presumably they've exhausted every resource forensically, legally.
I wouldn't presume that at all. You see, no, I wouldn't presume that at all, because when you look at these innocence cases, you'll see that they're really just the flip side of what I guess is sometimes referred to as cold cases. You know, what we're really doing is investigating matters that are 10, 15, 20, 30 years old. And, you know, why wasn't intensive investigation, or how intensive and how thorough was the investigation of these other 6 disappearances when he was first convicted?
But if you can bring a new review to innocence, and I welcome it.
Yeah.
There may well, we had, for example, the Birmingham 6 that were sent to prison for very long, and they were not.
Do you think there should be a guilty project?
Well, I think where the Gardaí have very strong concerns and some leads, and where something to this extent happened, I think there should similarly be made available to the Gardaí researchers, academics, others not necessarily on the payroll, but people who would work with the Gardaí and profile. And I understand from something I read recently by a former Garda who was writing the newspapers, that there is a sort of a profile.
There is a cold case unit that is now working exclusively on those projects, and it is the.
But I mean, you do have double jeopardy. I mean, how if someone?
Although that has changed, because we have followed the British recently in the huge amount of legislation that we have brought. The Justice Minister has changed the double jeopardy rule, so where there is new evidence that can be brought before, there will be an opportunity to do that.
So that's like a guilty project then, is it?
No, it's the same thing. I spent time training, working with New York City police officers in the cold case unit. It's the same enterprise. You go back, you look at the trace evidence, you try to reinvestigate. Just think of it. When we get somebody out of prison who didn't commit the crime, close to half the time, really more than half the time, we find the person who really did commit the crime. And they're usually serial murderers and serial rapists, because our cases deal with, with rape and murder. So that's what we found in all these cases. And the actual investigative means are absolutely no different. And all those resources should and must be employed. And we've learned a lot more now than we did when Larry Murphy was first convicted.
There must be a presumption of innocence in everybody's case. If for no other reason than somebody else who may have done this could be getting off the hook by somebody else being investigated.
But you said at one stage, Jay, correct me if I'm wrong, in a speech to the Dáil, I think, that, we assume everybody's going to work properly, when you do bring in a law, but there could be a small number of police officers and so on who could be delinquent just as easily as anybody else did in use.
Well, I have concerns separate to the issues that have been raised here. Every year since 1963, and I said this in the Dáil before I left the Dáil, every year since 1963 we have passed 2 criminal justice bills, and in some years 3. And if we tried to pass those in, say, tranches of 4 or 5, there would have been uproar in the Dáil. And we no sooner have passed one piece of legislation than the back looking for more legislation. Legislation on its own is not the answer. And we don't have to build up hugely expensive resources to back up the cold case review or the Gardaí. We should be thinking innovatively, just like Griffith College are thinking with Barry, looking at innocent cases, and I welcome that, I want to make that very clear, but similarly, as Barry has said, where there's new types of profiling, resources of that kind should be made available to the Gardaí, particularly where they have leads. And if those leads run cold, it may well be. I remember cases, I remember a former politician who was once a guard telling me he was sent to arrest a suspect for murder, and on the way himself and the other guard in the car discussed the matter, and they both agreed they didn't think this guy was guilty. They turned the car around and back to the superintendent and said, look, we think we should take some more time over this. This is the story he told me. And subsequently evidence turned up to show that this man couldn't have been the man, because there was corroborating evidence.
It's not he didn't do the crime, he couldn't have done it.
No, couldn't have done it. But similarly, I remember there was a case out in Swords where a girl came down from Belfast on a computer date, which were unheard of at the time. And of course there was all sorts of... The woman was picked up by somebody passing by in a van and offered a lift completely randomly. But so we really need to be very careful, and there has to be a presumption of innocence. But that doesn't mean that the Gardaí should not be fully resourced. It doesn't mean more and more taxpayers' money. There must be other universities and people like the academics in Griffith, and maybe even the people in Griffith, who would assist the Gardaí as well to try to pursue this. This is something that really concerns people, and if I may say so, women in particular, or the fathers of women. This is without precedent, and it really is a very upsetting and worrying
There's technology now. If they could find just one of these bodies. You know,
one of them, Anna McCarrick, is from the United States, isn't she, from New Jersey?
Just find one location. I know they've been searching. You know, there could be hair. And we now have the capability using mitochondrial DNA testing that didn't exist before to get a DNA profile from the hair, the shaft of the hair, from a single hair. You just, it's a DNA that is inherited maternally, but you can get a mitochondrial pattern. You can get a Y DNA pattern from a very small piece of biological evidence. This is done all the time in our cases. If you find just a piece of clothing at the scene, you know, that is near the body, and that is a piece of clothing that was worn by the assailant, or a piece of ligature. You can't believe what we can do. And
it is, Barry, but I'm just thinking here, the CSI influence. Criminals also, or those who commit criminal acts, I suppose, they're also very aware of what you can do.
I don't care what you do. You can shed a hair in a crime scene, and nobody was thinking about that when these murders were committed, because that kind of technology didn't, you know, exist. Or, you know, we are solving these kinds of cases in the United States and all across the world. The technology is improving. The investigative means are improving. And that's really what we're doing in these innocence cases. They are cold cases. And so I agree completely that just resourcing the Garda is key.
I think the separate issue for people and for a lot of women, certainly by reading that Facebook site, is that, you know, there is a memory, there's a very strong public memory of the particular horrific nature of the rape and assault of that woman, and were it not for those men, God knows what the outcome for that lady would have been. And I think for women, they're like, well, you know, here's a guy who received no treatment in prison in terms of, you know, undergoing
but
any
you can't treat people who don't ask for treatment.
And he refused to go for it. So I think people are worried about the public risk of him when he's released back into the community, and that's a concern with very many people who commit violent crimes, who, you know, commit rapes. So there's a separate issue about
remorse.
And he showed absolutely no remorse. But that's an issue with the release of a lot of prisoners as to what do they do when they're released back into the community. I have no doubt that with a combination of both the Garda surveillance, so that he will be, I'd say, just covered by probation, overt, covert surveillance, and surely just the media attention alone, I think, in this case will ensure that he'll be kept under wraps at least.
Yeah, he's a very scary guy, I think, eh? If he was a constituent of yours and he came to you and said, MEP Mitchell, I'm being harassed by the media, the police are continually harassing me, what can you do about that?
I don't think you could broadcast what I would say to somebody like that who came to me. I think this guy is very lucky to have got away with the sentence he got so far. And I don't think there's any sympathy. The crime was particularly horrendous. And I have had people come to me in my clinics, and I have had people write to me. Indeed, I've had lawyers write to me on behalf of clients saying, you know, this man has been in prison for so long and should be released. There's a procedure and a process for dealing with those things. I don't think anybody in their right minds would see any case to be made for making representations.
Well, he's served his prison sentence.
Yeah, he has served.
He's done what society has asked of him.
He has served his sentence because he was charged with a particular crime, and the court applied what I believe was the maximum sentence that could apply in that particular case. I think there's an awful lot of people, because of the nature of the crime, would have been happier if that was a much longer sentence. But we have to live with that. We have to live with the rule of law.
Even if it had been a longer sentence, let's say the judge had given him 20 years, in several years' time we would have been still having the same conversation. Had he been given a life sentence, which you can get for rape, then you're into a different territory, because you're into ministerial discretion. But even if he weren't being released this year, it might be next year or the year after. So we would still be having that discussion at that time.
Quickly, Barry, tell me, in the United States, I suppose, there are no such worries as that, because you hear of guys getting, you know, 227 years and things like that. In some states.
Yeah, I mean, our sentencing laws are draconian compared to what you have here, but by any measure, you know, this was a brutal, horrible crime, and people would have felt more comfortable if he did more time. But I suspect that what's really bothering everybody are the unsolved 6 homicides.
Yeah.
If this were just a man who was convicted of rape and he was getting out, as horrible as the crime was, that would be one thing. But the fact that they said he's under suspicion for these other matters.
And if you look at the profile of each of those killings, they're remarkably similar. They're women moving throughout the same area, and then this man was a hunter. He had an
Is there still a bridge, though, between what we inherently feel and suspect and feel about this man and bringing evidence before a court? And until we bridge that gap, unfortunately, we can't imprison him for that suspicion.
For all you know, with all the attention brought to bear on this matter, they reinvestigate it. They may find that these murders are linked to somebody else.
Well, I think
but they just have to be adequately
the Facebook site. I think if people know, I don't know how to access a Facebook site, but I think if people knew about this Facebook site, it wouldn't be 12,000.
12,000 people.
I don't think you'd have 12,000. I think you'd have 1 million people. People are really concerned for what they've read about this case.
So do we change the law? Do we change the rule of law because of public opposition?
I don't think you can change the rule of law.
And that's the issue.
No, that's usually why it is changed.
No, well, I don't think you can change. The rule of law has to apply. If you believe in law and order, then you have to believe in law, and the law is there, and the judges apply the law. But the Gardaí say they have other leads which are not strong enough for them to pursue to a conclusion, and I believe they should be resourced. And it doesn't mean more money necessarily. Maybe the sort of resource that Griffith is making available for the innocent cases, but there should be every avenue pursued. This is a...
The state never runs out of policemen, lawyers, or funds to prosecute.
But you have to keep finding new ways of looking at things. It's the same on the innocent side. If people are constantly looking at it in new ways, I think there's some hope. Yeah.
Barry, what do you say about that?
I'll predict to you right now that one of the things that will happen is that with all the publicity around these unsolved murders, people will come forward who haven't come forward before. New leads will be developed, new witnesses will emerge who maybe didn't say anything years ago, who didn't even realize that they had anything relevant to say. And that's what happens in all these cases. So new intense interest will generate new leads with new technology. You may very well find that one or some of these are solved.